Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. So today I'm here with Lior Steinberg from the company Humankind.city, and he's joining us from Rotterdam today. Hello, Lior. How are you doing?
Hey, Joe, how are you?
Good, excellent. So I invited Lior on the show today because we wanted to talk about his updated post. He wrote it, the original, quite a while ago. It was in 2017, correct?
Yeah, I think I started writing it even before, but probably I published it for the second time in 2017.
Cool. I'm just going to throw up your post on the screen right now. Could you take us through this post, why you did it, and the latest updates that you put in?
Yeah, maybe you can even open the presentation. It would be, I think, even easier.
Ah, sure.
Well,
Yeah, no problem. Let me get
but
it up.
basically, yeah, I started writing this post when I studied at the University of Groningen several years ago. Being non-Dutch or non-American,
Hmm.
I was very familiar with the NACTO planning guides. They are very beautiful. But then I got my hand on the Crow guide for the first time, and I realized that the numbers are much better. The data is much better in the Dutch design guide, but it's not as popular. Back then it was only in Dutch, if I remember, but now it's also available in English. And still, the Nakto guide is yeah more widespread. People share pictures from it. It looks great, very beautiful design. So I just decided to design with the same kind of style, the two a bike lane and a bicycle track, and
Yeah.
show how the Dutch standards are much better.
Well, okay. So you wrote this post when you kind of had this inkling, and you compared the Dutch guide to the NACTO guide.
Yeah.
So take us through what you found in terms of the main differences in there.
Yeah, so I think back then I wasn't very familiar with all the requirements of a bicycle network, and I think that if you look at it very shallowly on bicycle infrastructure, you can just compare the width of lanes, so the existence of lanes.
Yeah.
Is there a lane or not? Is it continuous? And I think we will discuss it later on. But then you just what you feel as a cyclist is the bike lane or the bike track uh, wide enough, and that's all I compared. So I think I don't remember the numbers. We will see them later, but the American minimum requirements for bicycle tracks is 1.5 meter compared to the Dutch minimum requirements, which is 2 meter. And you can
Hmm.
imagine it sounds only 50 centimeters, but it is a big difference when you cycle on it.
Yeah. I was wondering. So you got some comments actually on this latest post of yours about the specifics in terms of. Sorry about that. Uh, the specifics in terms of how the the different widths are actually described. Like you had the gutter width, you had the shy width. So what was the differences in how these design guys try to set out these minimum standards? And also, I was wondering if these guidelines are really being adhered to from your experience traveling through the world.
Yes, I think if you now going to enter the post, you will see I have some mistakes there with the right dimensions and the illustrations that I made because the American guide has a different uh, guidelines regarding the width of the rideable part, and then the bike lane is not the entire bike lane can be rideable because you have the sewage infrastructure, for instance. I'm updating it now, so if you look at it at April the 1st, you probably will still see the wrong dimensions in the post. If you pull out the presentation, we can see.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's coming up on the
yeah, but
screen
then
for you now.
I think what is really interesting is that the guideline is one thing, but then reality is different. So
Yeah.
I just tried to illustrate with a nice graphic how a Dutch bicycle lane would look like versus an American bicycle lane, and the same for bicycle path or tracks, just to show the difference. The same setting, how it feels differently instead of showing two different pictures from the countries. But we all know that actually, if you go to cities outside the Netherlands or Denmark, and you see bicycle infrastructure that is being built, yeah, it's not the same as the guide. So normally the guide acts as the kind of like the recommendation, although many times they claim it's the minimum. Um, but then yeah, but then the cities don't really follow it.
Yeah. So tell me what this is all about. So you have these guidelines being set out, these standards for the bike lanes, but why do we do it? Why do we need such a wide bike lane? And what does that mean for social cycling?
Yeah, so this is specifically why do we need a guide is
Yeah.
I think the knowledge is not there in most municipalities. I mean, we are working as humankind with in different countries with different cities. The building a road for cars, everybody knows how to do it. We've been doing it for decades. Building a road, like building bicycle infrastructure, many cities don't know it, so they look for this knowledge out there, and that's where those guides, the Dutch guide and the American guide, are coming. And then, of course, you have those local guidelines or regulations that are normally looking much worse than the state-of-the-art recommendations. But then, if you look just about the width of bicycle path, I think what is very common to see if you cycle or walk around the Netherlands or Denmark is to see cyclists cycling slowly next to each other because the bike lane is wide enough. And this is something you don't see in other countries where or other cities where you have those very narrow kind of leftovers of the road bicycle lanes where they just fit in the bicycle infrastructure wherever it was kind of possible. That's where cyclists use it maybe in order to move from A to B, but it's not a social. It has no social meaning. They don't speak with people. They cannot easily stop. They cannot cycle slow and just look around. They just have to go through the street, try not to get hit by a car. Um, and I think those sometimes you don't realize how those 20 centimeters of wider infrastructure make the difference.
Yeah. And for our viewers out there, there's 30 of you right now joining us. If you have any questions for Lior or for myself, make sure you put your comments in the live chat below. And we're going to wrap up this article, and we'll head over to chapter 5 of the Crow Manual in a short period. So I have one more question about this article for you, Lior, and that is you end here saying that I quote, the differences between the design guides is not just cosmetic. Half a meter can be the difference between a stressful adventure and a great cycling experience. That's one of the differences that makes so many Dutch people pick up the bike when they need to go somewhere. Wide and safe infrastructure is what brings the masses, and not only the fanatics, to cycle. Could you comment on that?
Well, I agree with myself. I agree
Yeah.
with you there several years ago. And I think that this is, I mean, a lot of people, I guess that we have viewers also from outside the Netherlands, they think of the Dutch people as a great cyclists, people who know how to cycle. But as, I mean, you live in the Netherlands, I live in the Netherlands, we are both not Dutch, and we cycle much more probably than we cycle back home. And that's because the infrastructure makes it so easy. It's not a Dutch cyclists. Dutch people are better cyclists. It's just that the infrastructure allows everybody who lives in Dutch city to cycle. And I think that's the only difference between the numbers in Dutch cities and outside the Netherlands is the quality of infrastructure.
Cool. I'm actually going to play a bit of a clip here of cycling through, Amsterdam, and I want to get your take because we go to actually different cities in the Netherlands, but the the city that most tourists see, right, is actually they come out of Central Station in Amsterdam, and they see like this very congested, crowded bike path. So I was wondering how, in your opinion, how accurate is what we're seeing here on the screen right now, representative of bicycle infrastructure in general in the Netherlands?
So the Amsterdam specifically, a few big cities have a good problem or a good challenge where
Yeah.
the bicycle tracks are really packed. So I would say that this is what we see now is a decent bicycle path in the
Hmm.
Netherlands, quite safe, right? It's separated from the road. You have the parking lanes defending the cyclist, and you have the bicycle lane is on kind of a different level than the sidewalk. I think
Yeah.
it's safe for everybody. In Amsterdam, I don't recognize now this specific street, but I would imagine that in rush hour this bicycle path is cramped with people, and it's really difficult to go through. Right? Is it true? Is
Yeah,
that true?
and it's really cool because the it's always being constantly upgraded. So the ones that this infrastructure that we see here is actually a bit older, right? So the new ones are made out of asphalt and they have
Yes.
nicer, a bit wider, and they have more of the beveled curves that makes it
Is it
easier.
always good to make them with asphalt? I'm not sure because
I'm
sometimes we
not
want
sure
the
either.
cyclist to.
Yeah, because it's one is the this is interesting. One is the aesthetics. I kind of like the aesthetics of a brick road better, but I think that the comfort, especially if you're on a bike with a skinnier tire, I think it is much more comfortable to be on an asphalt track if it's well maintained.
It is, but then also I would say, well, it really depends on the context, and I think we will speak about it as well.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
sometimes you don't want the cyclists to go as quick. You want them to go slower and a bit less comfortable, let's say,
Hmm.
if they try to go faster, because you want the pedestrians to feel safer. You want to invite the less speedy cyclists to come over. So yeah, I think it's always about the context. What do you try to achieve in the road?
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on. And I want to give you a chance to talk a bit about your company, Humankind, and what you do there as part of that as part of your team. Actually, I'll bring up your website on the browser here.
Cool. So yeah, while you are pulling it off, um, Humankind is a agency for urban change. We started it in Rotterdam a couple of years ago as a not as a yeah, let's say normal bicycle company or urban design company. We are not all urban designers or planners. What we try to achieve in different ways, either sense of hardware, changing the cities, or in programs and yeah, other elements, is that we really try to achieve urban change. We try to make our cities, as our name implies, more human and more kind. And it's about creating slower streets. It's about making places for people to meet each other, to make mistakes, to learn from each other, to have the experience of a great social city. And I think specifically cycling and cycling in the Netherlands in general is exactly that thing. You can go slowly or you can go fast. You can fail. It's not like cycling in other places where you have to always stay in shape and have a helmet. It's a place. I always describe. I think you're familiar with it, the
Yeah.
city of Groningen. I always describe the bicycle experience there as almost like cycling on a cloud. Like nothing can happen to you. It's so
It's
safe and fun.
it's all the busyness of Amsterdam. So all the pleasantness of Amsterdam with much less of the crowded busyness.
Yeah, I
So
think you just take off the tourists from
yeah,
Amsterdam.
it's rather pleasant. So if you have a chance in the Netherlands to go by train to Groningen, definitely check it out. So that's really cool, and you're definitely still open for business, right, during these Corona times.
Absolutely, we are
Yeah,
working. We are consulting to different countries and different cities. We are working on the bicycle strategy of Tel Aviv in Israel with partners in Israel. So it all goes on still, and yeah, of course everything is slower, but we also have much more time to sit at home and think. So that's
yeah,
also great.
for sure. Let's pop over to the Crow manual then. And today the theme is going to be chapter 5. We're going to loosely structure this talk around the different themes in chapter 5. So I'm going to go to an overview now of the different sections in chapter 5. We have 5.1 function design and use, 5.2 requirements for a road section, 5.3 the solitary bicycle paths or slash moped paths. Yes, there's quite a few mopeds in some cities in the Netherlands, like Rotterdam, for example, actually. And 5.4 bicycle traffic and motorized traffic in built up areas. 5.5 bicycle sorry, that's a typo, and then 5.6 special situations. So let's go to 5.1 function, design, and use. And I wanted to start here by seeing what the layout of this chapter is. So I think this chapter is quite cool because it starts with a lot of graphs actually, and a lot of these charts that show you how wide things be, and it's very heavy on the different numbers, I'd say. So let's start with the first section here, which is the introduction, and it says this quote: "The cycle network comprises a cohesive aggregate of bicycle connections. Bicycle connections consists of a succession of road sections and junctions." Right. So chapter 5 covers the road sections, and then chapter 7 later, then, or is it 6, covers the junctions. Junctions will be covered in chapter 6, so that'll be on a later video. So today we're going to begin here with 5.1, function, design, and use. And this basically lays out the 5 principles that we kind of introduced in chapter 2 of good bicycle design. But the one thing that's actually missing in this chapter is the element of coherence. And so presumably coherence wasn't included in the road sections chapter because Lior and I had a conversation about this. Perhaps it's because on the street level it doesn't matter as much, but on the network level, coherence plays much more of a role in elements such as wayfinding, such as the various signs, such as and how we perceive the city. So Lior, I have a question for you in relation to this. What is the relationship between the macro level planning, so the streets, the city level network planning, and the street level planning, and where do we make that distinction between the large scale elements where we do have to worry about coherence, and then the more of the street level where we really think section by section? How do you approach that problem?
I think that it's one of the biggest questions in urbanism in general, right? Because a city is built of streets. It's just, and yeah, streets is what making a city such a great place to be in. But then you cannot plan a bicycle network street by street. You need to have a big idea. I mean, it's not just the residents of a street use the bicycle infrastructure outside their home. You need to have first a bigger idea of how the network would look like, where people need to coming from, what is the destinations, and then you need to have some kind of an idea about how the network should feel like. And when you build a bicycle infrastructure in streets, so basically the sections that we're going to discuss now, it has to fit this general idea of how the city should look like and feel like. And I think Amsterdam is doing it quite well. There's kind of, and a lot of Dutch cities, to be honest, they have kind of this network that they look at, but then they make sure that all the bits and pieces within the network really fit this general idea.
Okay, let's go ahead, and I just found the chart now. So it's table 5.1 from the book, and this is on page 98 of the book. And here, the main requirements: directness, safety, comfort, and attractiveness are applied to the street sections. And I think I wanted to focus on the idea of comfort. So I think directness, safety, there's been a lot of research. We in generally know how to achieve these things. The question is application. Whereas this idea of comfort and attractiveness, I think these criteria is more less well defined by their nature, right? So for example, comfort, there's a few categories here. Preventing the loss of time is one. Flow, evenness, discomfort due to gradients, traffic nuisance, and weather nuisance. Now, of these, I think it's interesting, some of these are not we're not able to control as well, such as weather nuisance, right? It's going to rain in the Netherlands. But there are other aspects, such as this idea of flow, that road sections are sufficiently wide, that curved radii takes the design speed, extreme bendiness is prevented. Though I would also add another aspect to this idea of flow, and it's this feeling of flow. It's the experience that you talked about in your blog post, right? It's this feeling of not having to be annoyed by stopping at traffic lights. Not necessarily the time loss, but just being in the groove and then having to stop. So could you comment on how comfort can be also thought of as an experience, not just these technical elements?
Yeah, so I would even argue that we can influence weather, nuisance, and of course comfort and the togetherness of cycling um, when it comes to when you plan the network. And I will just give an example because you just mentioned that we cannot control the weather, and we can't, of course, although we do it, but that's for another webinar about climate change. But For instance, now in Tel Aviv, it's a very hot place. It's a Mediterranean city, sunny, and one of the problems there is that people don't want to cycle in the summer because it's so hot. But then there are things you can do in order to make the cycling more comfortable. So first, the worst thing about cycling is stopping because then you need to start cycling again. That's like the worst part of cycling. Yeah, you need to take all your energy in order to start again. So you can make sure that cyclists don't really need to stop. You have a green wave and they just go on. Then they don't spend too much energy, don't sweat as much. You can also place the the sections in shadowed places, so next to buildings, especially. You can calculate when the sun is hitting the road, and then where you can place the network. And then, of course, especially in such places, but then I would say everywhere, you need to have sufficient space. Don't make cyclists feel like they just get the leftovers of the road. They really need to have sufficient space, and this is something that just makes once it's comfortable, it's not only about the people that are crazy about cycling. Then you start really getting the rest, like the real people, quote unquote. Oh, I think we have an audio problem.
Sorry, we do have an audio. Thanks. So I was just saying, is there a way that you explain this attractiveness in your work to people who may not be so familiar with, let's say, this idealized bike path image that we see in this picture here, right? So this green solitary bike path, that's quiet, in a place like perhaps Tel Aviv. In your work, is it difficult to try and get people to understand this idea of this attractiveness?
I would say you cannot explain it really.
Mm-hmm.
You have to feel it. And for us, what works really well is bringing our clients or people that are interested in cycling, bring them to the Netherlands, taking them to those places. One thing we do very often is when we cycle with our clients or the people that come to learn from the Netherlands, we take them we take them in one route to the university, for instance, and then we go back on another route that might take longer. And we ask them how they felt in this. Did they feel that took longer to cycle? And they didn't because they cycled through a park or through a green route. And then I think that that's where they start to understand the power of maybe a bit slower routes, but where you really enjoy the cycling. It's where you would choose maybe to cycle on a Sunday on a sunny weekend day, or maybe in the morning you will take the fast route, which is not very fun to go to, but then after work or after your studies, you will be able to go back home through the slow but more interesting route. And of course, the problem is that every person has a different um, yeah, perceptions of what is attractive. But I think that most people do like green, quiet, clean air routes, and this is what at least we try to explain to our collaborators.
Cool. I want to go through a few charts in this chapter as well. I pulled up this chart where it there's instructions on how to deal with streets, for example, with a tight profile, right? And I was wondering how useful this is to your work. So on the y-axis, right, you have the uh, passenger PCU passenger vehicle, yeah, right, vehicles, and then on the x axis you have the bicycles per hour, passenger
Yeah.
car equivalents, right? Passenger car units. So it's very traffic engineering speak. And then it gives you this option of having a lot of room on the street, or do we want a bicycle street? So at what point do we turn a bike lane into a bike street? And I think that's a very interesting innovation here in the Netherlands, where they've decided that for a very busy street, right, where there's cyclists spilling all over the place, so out of the bike lane, and clearly you have like people riding 4 or 5 abreast trying to pass each other, that the best way in a tight space is to reduce the automobile traffic and to give, in fact, the entire lane, in principle, to bicycle traffic. And I think in other places like the US, people have tried to apply this concept through ideas such as bicycle boulevards, where they paint arrows on the street and try and make traffic calm neighborhoods into a place where cyclists have priority. But sometimes they don't work so well. And some of that has to do with the behavior of drivers, right, in relation to being courteous, in relation to yielding behavior where it's necessary, and I guess a bit of common sense, and putting themselves into the shoes of the cyclist. What would it be like to be passed really closely by a big truck, going close to you? So in the work that you do, how much of the work is trying to get the local culture and context and behavior incorporated into a design of a road?
I think that what you just described of I think the US, where they try to, or North America, where they try to just turn a road that now has a lot of car traffic and some bicycle traffic, and then by drawing few icons on symbols on the road, try to change the entire culture, or hope that everything will change, and then being surprised that cars are still driving the same and it's still difficult to cycle there. I think that's exactly the misunderstanding of how people behave in the public space. So you cannot only educate. I mean, you need to educate people, and you need to start to introduce drivers to the idea and the behavior of cyclists, but you cannot do it without really change either the design of the road or the amount of traffic going there. So if you want to reduce not only the speed of traffic, which requires also physical changes, but also the amount of traffic, which is how many people, how many cars actually go through every hour and every moment. And I think what you see, if we again compare bicycle guidelines or bicycle design guidelines, is that in many countries they only speak about the speed of cars. So if it's a busy road, uh, build this wide infrastructure for this separation. Whereas in the Dutch guidelines, they speak about three things. First about the role of the route
Yeah.
in the bicycle network. This is very important. Then the speed of cars, but then also the amount of cars. So if you have only one car going very fast once an hour, you don't need to really build a separation. But if you have many, many, many cars going very slow, it's very difficult to cycle through them, and then you do need to have separation. So it's not only about the speed, it's also about the numbers. And then the
So
question about culture,
yeah.
uh, I would say, yeah, first do the physical change. Don't blame it on culture. Don't blame. It's very easy to be a cyclist or cycle around the city and blame drivers that they don't get you, but they're just used to do what they always done. And if you don't really make change in the city, you cannot expect them to make the cultural change.
Do you think it's really enough though? Because the way we talk in a piece that I wrote about design manuals and as political technology, it seems odd to talk about cars as the starting point. Even though much of the work that's being done these days is to promote humans as a starting point. To then, you even started with this comment with, well, if there are less cars, then we can then put in better cycling infrastructure. So that brings me to this table here, right? Which shows, right, a residential road, a distributor road, and the speed limits and the vehicle capacity, and then it gives you advice on whether you can put bikes in mixed traffic, cycle path, or a separated, like, wider bike moped path. And one can imagine a world where we flip this around, where we take the number of cyclists or the number of bikes, the number of people walking as the starting point, and then seeing how we can then shoehorn cars into the space. And really that is the word, is we're trying to shoehorn automobiles into, usually if we're having a conflict in the city center, into somewhere that perhaps it doesn't really make sense for vehicles to be there. But I think the problem with that reverse logic is that because we've already built cities with cars as the primary mode, we don't have this alternative future to deal with, right? Like, it's even hard for us to imagine, to say, okay, if we took away all the cars, all the people would be there. But in fact, way back in the turn of the century, that was the case. It's like the people were there, and then we shoehorn cars in, and over the course of 50, 100 years, cars become the default. And now what we have is this chart that then puts passenger car traffic on the y-axis, and then bikes and pedestrians as the dependent variable. So that the cars are independent; they're just there as a physical phenomenon, and then the rest of the world kind of has to adjust to the reality of the car. Whereas I think what we're trying to do is flip the idea around and get automobiles to adjust to the reality of people and bikes, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's just my rant.
Amen.
Yeah. I wanted to show this picture, and it's you probably know this in Amsterdam. It's actually in the Crow manual. The green tramway with the bike path. Yeah, it's part of the road sections. So it's right across this bridge. I go by this by the university quite often, and and I think even having the trams on greenways, and you have those in Rotterdam as well, really adds to the cycling environment, right? So not having asphalt there and having grass instead. Have you promoted this type of street design in your work?
Not per se,
Yeah.
that I can recall. I think when people see it for the first time, when they visit Rotterdam or Amsterdam, they're quite excited. It's quite unique. I think mostly they think about, yeah, it just looks nice.
Hmm.
But as someone who cycles past those quite often, I can also, yeah, just share that they are also quieter. So when the tram goes on those green, it
Yeah.
absorbs green, it absorbs the sound, it also absorbs water, so it's good uh, rain retention, and of course, when it's really hot and you don't have this entire asphalt taking absorbing all the heat, uh, it really helps to cycle next to green areas. And this is, I think, the really maybe the way that promoting cycling and walking and active mobility should go through. It should show how all those things together are not only about better mobility, it's about better cities where you don't have noise from traffic, you have good water retention, it's good for the climate which is changing. It, at the end, it all works together. It's so simple, but you just need to point those things out.
Wow. Yeah. And I think that's like well said that cycling and designing infrastructure for cycling has all these side benefits, right? And in fact, if we do public transport correctly as well, there's all these knock-on benefits that you discuss: water, environment, noise, and we should also be thinking of these aspects as well, in addition to a graph about motor vehicle volumes and speed, and how do we shoehorn a 2 meter wide bike lane in. These are difficult topics to talk about, but I think they're especially relevant on the street level, right? When we talk about street sections, when these micro design decisions get made, and I think this chapter in particular is quite a good guide for the basics, but in general, I think the starting point is traffic engineering language, and perhaps perhaps a starting point could be reversed or seen in a different way, and really bringing this idea of human-centered design to the forefront, and perhaps that could come in the next revision, where we are getting more used to bringing urban design language into the way we talk about streets and cities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to share about this road section chapter? We'll wrap it up pretty soon.
Yeah, I
Let
would.
me see if there are any questions here. Oh, hi, Paul. One chat. Hey. Yeah.
I would say the one lesson I have from guidelines in general is that it's very easy to refer to them as kind of suggestion. Um, but what I see that a lot of people, a lot of cities do is that they look at those guidelines, they look great, the graphic is great, and then when they apply it on reality, it always works. And I think that what the Netherlands does quite well, and still there are a lot of lanes even in the Netherlands or bicycle infrastructure that don't fit those guidelines, is that what the Netherlands does is that it actually follows those guidelines. And when we add those four criteria, right? Directness, safety, comfort, and attractiveness. Attractiveness is a bit well, questionable, but let's say the directness and safety. You have to follow it. You cannot just do one. If you just do one, it doesn't work. You have to follow all those three. It has to be comfortable. Otherwise, you will not have everybody cycling. And this is something that cities just need to understand. It's just a waste of money. They are building infrastructure that nobody uses, and then they blame they blame the cyclists that don't use it and say, yeah, you see, we spent all this money to build this quite crappy infrastructure and nobody uses it, so we don't need to invest more. And this is what we need to promote. It is You need to do it all. And the second thing I want to say is that I totally agree with you. I will not repeat it, but at the end of the day, if we remove all cars from our city, we don't need any dedicated bicycle infrastructure. And this is what we need to remember. This
Yeah.
entire guidelines is because we have cars and not vice versa. It's not because of the bicycles that we need these guidelines. It's because of the cars. The bicycles were there much before. Walking and actively moving was there much before. And I think in many cases, and that's what is being done in many countries around the world, the best solution is just close the road for cars, open it for active mobility. That's it.
Yeah, it's quite simple. Huh? I'm going to wrap up here with a few administrative things with the Urban Cycling Institute, and then we'll sign off with our audience. So hang on with me. I'll be right back. So a few updates from the Urban Cycling Institute, and I just wanted to tell you that unfortunately the summer school has been cancelled. So due to the coronavirus, very unfortunate, and really looking forward to it, actually, myself and all the guest lecturers. Really looking forward to this, what is always a good summer experience. But unfortunately, we made the call to cancel it at this point. We'll be back in 2021. So if you've already applied, we'll get back to you with further news. So instead of that, I mean, if you're watching this, you probably have done the course already, or if you haven't, hop on to Coursera. Unraveling the Cycling City is the name of our online MOOC. And today, if you want a credit for the course, sorry, not credit, if you want a certificate from Coursera for the course, please start now, because today is the first day, April 1st. And if you rather take the free version or go in as an auditor, you can start at any time. And the cost for the certificate is something like €50, or depending on where you are. And it'll get you a nice sheet of a nice file for you to put on LinkedIn upon completion. In there, you also find at the end our LinkedIn group where we keep all our alumni. And as you can see, 2,340 already enrolled. So that's really awesome. And finally, we've been posting some of the most outstanding, most inspiring essays that have come out of this course, because at the end, you write a 800-word essay, and we picked a few to feature on the Urban Cycling Institute website. So have a read if you're interested. Have a read about what people are thinking and talking about in cycling. And the MOOC is free for you to join, a slight cost for the certificate. And I want to thank you, everyone, for joining this live stream. I want to thank Lior for your time, and for the enthusiasm that you've put in, and also for the rather brilliant but provocative article that you've put on LinkedIn. So hope you keep doing the great work out there. Yeah, and stay safe out there. We'll be back with another chapter very shortly. Thanks, Lior. Thanks, guys, for watching, and take care.